Good evening, everybody. My name is Frank Harvey. I am the Dean of the Faculty of Arts and Social Sciences, and it is a real pleasure to welcome you here tonight for the Shaar Shalom Lecture. Before we begin, I'd like to recognize that the Student Union building, Dalhousie University, and our community benefit from and sit on ancestral and unceded Mi'kmaq territory, and we value our important relationship with Indigenous peoples. The Shaar Shalom Lecture at Dalhousie University is a public lecture series that explores the broad themes of tolerance, multiculturalism, diversity, and difference in contemporary Canadian society and beyond. And it is intended to demonstrate the shared interests of the Shaar Shalom Synagogue and Dalhousie University in advancing scholarly understanding of these themes and encouraging public discourse and public discussions around these important issues. And we are very, very grateful to the anonymous donor, to the Shaar Shalom Synagogue, and to the Shaar Shalom community for their very, very generous support for this lecture series. Tonight, Lieutenant General Roméo Dallaire will deliver a talk entitled "All Humans Are Human." And I'd like to introduce General Dallaire to those of you in the audience who may not be familiar with his many contributions to global peace, global security, and humanitarianism. Lieutenant General Dallaire served as Force Commander of the UN mission in Rwanda in 1993 to 1994, where he witnessed the horrors of a genocide that killed over 800,000 people, all compacted into a 13-week period. In the midst of this horror, General Dallaire refused an order by the UN to leave the country. He decided instead to remain in Rwanda with a reduced peacekeeping force, and he attempted to do whatever he could to save the lives of people in the midst of that catastrophe. General Dallaire's decision to stay reflected his commitment and his belief in the principle that all humans are human. His courage and leadership during the mission earned him the Meritorious Service Cross, the United States Legion of Merit, and the Aegis Award on Genocide Prevention. He also earned the affection and the admiration of people around the world, and I suspect everybody in this room. Upon his return to Canada, General Dallaire published his best-selling book, Shake Hands with the Devil, The Failure of Humanity in Rwanda, which was awarded the 2004 Governor General's Award for Nonfiction. His new book, Waiting for First Light, My Ongoing Battle with PTSD, was one of 12 books selected out of over 100 by publishers in Canada, the United States, and internationally for the RBC Taylor Prize. And as you know, after the talk, the General will be more than happy to sign books, I believe, in the room outside where all the books are, right? These are powerful books that shine a very bright light on genocide and post-traumatic stress disorder and serve as a personal account of his experiences in Rwanda and the combined impact of these experiences on his own life and his own struggles. After his return from Rwanda, General Dallaire became a strong and relentless advocate for veterans with PTSD, for genocide prevention, for the responsibility to protect doctrine, and of course for child soldiers. And in 2007, General Dallaire created the Roméo Dallaire Child Soldier Initiative, which is an organization with a mission to end the use and the recruitment of child soldiers. The RDCSI's advice and training has been sought by several international organizations, including NATO, the United Nations, the African Union, and the International Criminal Court, and several national security forces. And some of you may have noticed a piece in the Globe and Mail and The Economist noting that the RDCSI was instrumental in the writing of a new Canadian Armed Forces Joint Doctrine Note that provides very clear guidelines and strategic directions for situations in which Canadian troops encounter child soldiers. With all of that in mind, it is very easy to see why General Dallaire is an officer of the Order of Canada, a Grand Officer of the National Order of Quebec, a Commander of the Order of Military Merit, and a recipient of several honors, including the UN Association of Canada's Pearson Peace Medal, the Arthur Kroger College Award for Ethics and Public Affairs, the Laureate of Excellence from the Manitoba Health Sciences Center, the Harvard University Humanist Award, and in 2014, the Elie Wiesel Award presented by the Holocaust Memorial Museum in Washington, D.C. General Dallaire, former soldier, peacekeeper, senator, and one of Canada's great humanitarian, on behalf of Dalhousie University, the Shaar Shalom Synagogue, the Faculty of Arts and Social Sciences, and on behalf of everyone here, it is a distinct honor and privilege, sir, to thank you for your service and to welcome you back to Dalhousie to deliver the 2017 Shaar Shalom Lecture.
That was well done, Harvey. Well done.
Yep.
Thank you so much. Well, thank you very much, Dean. And good evening, ladies and gentlemen. And welcome to the campus after braving the cold still here. I'm originally from Quebec City, and there's snow, but it doesn't seem as cold as here. So I should like, right off the bat, to introduce a few of my members who work with me in the Roméo Dallaire Child Soldier Initiative. Others are deployed, but if I may introduce Josh, who's head of communications. Oh, stand up and take a bow. Come on. Yeah, go ahead. Jessica, who handles all kinds of administration and creates miracles. Joël is there also behind, who's working on the police project. Darren, although he's an ex-judge advocate general, he's turned into a pretty good guy, handles training. And Jennifer, who also works on training and puts Darren in the right place when he should be. So thank you very much. And last and not least, the person who brought us here to this progressive institution that Dalhousie is. And I'm not sure always if we realize that it's a pretty gutsy place to try and move yardsticks in different arenas, and in fact, present itself as a beacon from the east to those terrible people in Upper Canada and those who hide on the other side of the Rockies, let alone the lone prairies that are between. And this person who has academically studied in the realm of political science, but in particular with children affected by war, appeared at one of our meetings at the invite of a general who was working with me at the time and revolutionized our whole construct from a theoretical model that I had started in 2004 at Harvard to an actually working, field-focused, research-based, action-oriented institution in this university, and that's Dr. Shelley Whitman. Please. Dr. Whitman is our executive director. She's the mom of 4 boys, and she was also the goalie of our national women's soccer team. So you don't want to mess around with this lady. Ladies and gentlemen, we are proud to be here. And when our logo of the Child Soldier Initiative goes up, it is with great pride that it goes up right beside, or we bring beside it, the logo of this university, this institution. It gives us depth. It gives us that intellectual rigor that we can bring to the argument that although we are an organization that is nonprofit, we are not an NGO, we are an institution, an initiative that is actually research-based and that works on putting boots on the ground in the field with new ideas, new concepts, and specifically aimed at saving children and saving soldiers who face children. And so I'm going to take my 146 slides that I usually like to use, but my team has reduced me to 7 or 8. So I've become very flexible as a general. My buddies are worried about my mental health, but I am well served by this team of about 11 of us, as we are just on the cusp of moving from the consolidation of what we are and what we have been able to do, and the initial implementation of the research results and into the field. After 7, nearly 8 years of building that capacity and so on, we're just on the cusp of going global, to hit the world. To hit the world with one ambition, is to make it absolutely unthinkable that adults would use children to become their primary weapon of war, to fight adult wars. We are going to reduce those numbers, and we are going to change that attitude, and we will succeed. And we're going to do it right out of this place. And how are we going to do that? Now, to a good commander, contrary to World War I commanders, of which we're going to be commemorating Vimy Ridge this weekend. I have the pleasure of attending the ceremonies there with CTV. I am not a field commander in the back. We have changed. We want our generals forward. We want them to see where the crises are, to get their boots dirty and their hands dirty, and then bring that back and bring good guidance. And so I have been for too long, because of my tour of duty in the Senate, of course, but since I've resigned from the Senate over 2 years ago, I have finally decided and have been able to move my work, my little company that handles the few books that you will all buy this afternoon, and my wife and children, thank you for that, and also the work that I have been engaged in, my sort of lifestyle of living in Ottawa, from a condo to a lovely home in St. Margaret's Bay, and I have become a pseudo-Haledonian. And so I am now close enough to harass my troops as much as I can. And so this move has been sheer joy, except for one thing. You have got to stop doing the stopping for all these people who want to cross the roads. You can't imagine how many times I have nearly rear-ended more cars and trucks and buses in this town with people all of a sudden deciding to stop because somebody wants to cross the road. Montreal, they're targets. So we will adjust culturally to the different thing. You know, they often tell us, and the Americans love doing that, and I served with the U.S. Marines and trained with them and trained overseas and also studied with them. They often like to tell us that we're nice people. And I would like to sort of qualify that a bit more by saying that we've got a sense of human being, of sense of being human, of not being machines or numbers. And that's why I'm happy that, as an example, the Veterans Headquarters, where all the work for the veterans is in PEI. Because in PEI, people are still people, they're not numbers. In Ottawa, we tend to end up by being numbers, and trust me. And so that's a great asset to, I think, trying to resolve the complexities of what the needs of our veterans and their families are. And so coming into this milieu with this project, this ambition, was exactly the right place to be versus being in Montreal or Toronto or wherever. And so I am thankful to the institution. I'm thankful to Frank Harvey, for being so patient, although I love harassing him, and for giving us the support, in fact. You and Richard did, the president, which I like calling director, for the support you have given us. So what of this evening? And the evening, what I would like to do is to give you a feel of how we are affecting war, how we are actually affecting how wars will be reduced in length, in scale, and hopefully that if wars have to happen, that people are conducting themselves within the laws of armed conflict, of humanitarian law, and respect of the premises that have taken centuries for us to build, instead of just being a bunch of savages going at each other, but in fact responding to an ethos, responding to values that we come to the battlefield with, and respond to the needs of our societies that count on us. And so in doing that, the target area that we're looking at, the area that has come to the fore is the children and the use of children. And I want to use, because of the title, a bit of an anecdote of whether or not really children are all the same. By extension, whether or not all humans are human. Is it possible, in fact, that some humans think themselves more human than others? That you are actually of different humanity? And the example I like to use is this one true life, where during the genocide, about the 6th, 7th week, we were able to negotiate between the warring factions, the two ethnic groups, that there were people caught behind their lines that were not of their ethnic group. They were under our protection. And as the two armies were fighting, there's usually a lull every now and again, and they sort of separate, and they call it no man's land. It's not very political proper, but anyways, that's what it's still called today. And so this area, there's nobody to be no one. And so I'm negotiating, so I'm driving between the two lines, negotiating to get the transfer of these people safely before the fighting restarts. And as I'm going down this road, about a couple 100 meters ahead, there's a little boy in the middle of the road. He's about 7 years old. Now, that immediately sent signals, because the extremists were using young children to stop the convoys of food and water, wood, sheeting, medical supplies, for the nearly 4 million internally displaced and refugees. I don't know what the population of this province is, but I suspect we got to take a few provinces in the Maritimes to equal 4 million and consider them all walking on roads in mud and rain and hills for over 3 months. And those are the ones that survived. And so we had to get humanitarian aid to them. And so as we moved the humanitarian aid, the extremists would put children on the roads where they knew the humanitarian convoys would come, and then they would block the convoy, of course. And if the kids didn't stay there, they simply killed them outright. And so the kids would stay there, convoy would stop, the extremists would attack the convoy, steal what they wanted, and continue the slaughter. Because by then, they had only killed about 250,000 out of the ultimate 800,000. Only 250,000. And so we slowed down. I had a couple soldiers with me. We jumped out expecting an ambush. No ambush. So there were huts along the road, and we went to the huts to look if somebody was there. There should be nobody, but there's this child. So, and yeah, we found bodies of people who had been killed weeks beforehand, and so on. And as we're looking for somebody to take care of this child, we lose the child. So there's mines and all kinds of things, and God knows what that was in that zone that had been fought over already. So we went back looking for him, and we found him in a hut where there were 2 adults, a male and female, and 2 children, and they were half eaten by dogs and rats. And he was sitting there as if he was at home. Maybe it was his home. So I picked him up and I brought him in front of my vehicle, and I looked at him. And he was some mangy, and some dirty, and some smelly. And he had flies all around him, and he was in rags, and his stomach was bloated. He was starving. But then I looked into his eyes. And what I saw in the eyes of that little boy, in the midst of that slaughter, that genocide, that civil war, was exactly what I saw in the eyes of my 7-year-old son that I had left in Quebec City when I went off to Africa. They were the eyes of a human child, and they were exactly the same. That kid is just as human as my son. There is no difference. Their life is equal. The right to life, the right to hope, the right to aspire is equal. Equal. And unless we take that perspective, that in fact, ultimately all of humanity is equal, we will continue to artificially create frictions that still too often degenerate into catastrophic failure where people simply slaughter each other because they don't like whatever the other person has. I believe one day that will stop. May take a couple centuries yet. But if we keep fighting for human rights and we keep thriving to inject ourselves into the processes, we, the 20% of the haves, I truly believe that we're going to wear them down, and one day we will resolve our frictions, but not having to use force, not having to destroy other people. And we will find that serenity that Captain Kirk keeps talking about in Star Trek that happened on Earth. It's going to happen if we keep at it. So the premise of why we're engaged with children and in these far-off lands, and also children even at home who are being recruited to go and fight in far-off lands, is because we consider these children to be equal, to still be children. They may be used as weapons of war, but they are still children. And so that is the start point. That all these humans are human. And that in my mind, there is no argument that can stand the test of that premise. There is no difference or friction that is powerful enough to prove to me that there are some humans more human than others. We may be of the 20% of the haves, but that doesn't make us more human. That makes us maybe more responsible towards humanity. And so what of that? And I thought that in order to make my argument move forward is that I thought first maybe we got to explain what's been going on out there as we find ourselves stumbling in a new era since the end of the Cold War. And you remember the Cold War, for those who don't have gray hair, that's up to 1989, where we had in Europe millions of troops in uniforms facing each other, just waiting for some idiot to say go, and then we'd go after it. And that ended in 89, and then we saw a whole whack of countries imploding, and failing states, and dictators being overturned, and civil wars, as nations tried to establish themselves after years of colonial power and those dictatorships and the heavy hand of the East and the West on them. And also the fact that the World Bank and others insisted that they become democratic sort of overnight. Well, in the time that happened, we all of a sudden found ourselves in a whole different set of parameters of what conflict is. And in fact, it wasn't war and it wasn't peace. It wasn't that we were not peacekeepers anymore. It's that keeping peace was different. Keeping peace was no more a pair of short pants, baseball bat, the blue beret, and everybody likes you except you didn't have a red card to bring them back into order. You were there to observe and to assist. That whole scenario changed. When I deployed to Rwanda, the start was that. That was my mandate, to observe. How long do you observe the slaughter of hundreds of thousands before maybe we got to change the rules? And so we entered a new era in which it's no more big armies of big armies. We have imploding nations. We have Rwandans slaughtering Rwandans, and we have Congolese doing the same, and we have people from the same backdrop of national structure going at each other within the most ferocious of wars. The most devastating of wars is civil wars. And this change that has happened has brought new weapons to the fore. One of them is rape, deliberately to try to destabilize societies, create horror, and through that fear and control the population. But the other one that has been so prevalent since the late 80s and has continued to be out there and continues to find new ways to adapt itself is the fact of going after children and using children as the best weapon of war. Actually going and saying, because they're young, we want to recruit them. Where we used to say, because they're young, we don't recruit them. I'm going to Vimy Ridge, and there are 16 and 17-year-olds who fought there and died there as they snuck in under the wire to go and fight. By exception. We're not talking anymore of exceptions. We're talking about these children being the principal tools of these conflicts and being sustained by adults. And these children are in fact fighting adult wars for the adults. And this has changed the parameters of conflict. There are no more people in uniforms that you're facing. They're interscene, they're inside of the communities and societies. And they're children, and they're boys, and they're girls, and they're 9 and 10 and 12 and 14. And they're used in many, many ways. Brutality being one that you can get a lot of mileage by showing how brutal they are with Al-Shabaab and Boko Haram and ISIS, as we've seen too often. And so the nature of war has changed. And if the nature of war has changed in conflict, we've got to change too. We've got to stop ad hocing our way through this. We've got to stop being taken by surprise. We've got to stop all of a sudden trying to react to catastrophic failures. We got to get ahead of that game. We got to understand what it is, and we got to bring new solutions to it. And bringing new solutions from where we stood was, how do you reduce the scale and the capabilities of many of these forces? And one of the ways of doing that is preventing them to use children. Preventing the use of children, which are their mobilization base for so many of those militaries, for so many of those non-state actors. There's 51 non-state actors out there. There's still 7 countries that are using them. But there are 51 non-state actors using thousands upon thousands of children. How do we get at that war? What tactics can we handle to get the advantage so we can stop it before they continue to find themselves in quandaries of having to use lethal force to destroy children. And so that has been the premise by which we established our sort of statement of approach, our mission statement. We wish to progressively, not going to do it overnight, this is long term. We're going global. You know, all you under 25s who are part of the Generation Without Borders, you're global with your social communications and so on. You're talking to, soon you'll Skype anybody in the world. You're already global. Well, what we're doing is we're talking global. We're talking world. We're talking the whole of humanity. And we're going to eat away at it. Like you eat away at an elephant. You take it one bite at a time. Or how do you eat a 1-ton marshmallow? You eat it one bite at a time. And so we will progressively end the use of child soldiers through a security sector approach. Now, what does that sort of mean? We have, over the last 25 years, seen massive amounts of money being expended on child soldiers. It's not the first time you've heard about it. And we've seen them in a number of conflicts. But what we have been doing has been looking at child soldiers as an afterthought in the conflicts. Not as a primary weapon being used to sustain the conflict, but as an afterthought. This is a social economic problem. You know, these are kids, but we got more important things to do. And so the children, who are the essence of the combative forces, have not, in fact, been approached in making them less combatant, less effective. What we've been doing is putting a whole whack of resources and effort in rehabilitating and reintegrating and building schools and all kinds of things for these children who have been able to escape or been extracted from these non-state actors, and we're putting them through 3-month courses or 6-month courses and so on. And many of the girls, because 40% of the child soldiers are girls, many of them have maybe a child or two and trying to help them come back to health, let alone know how to take care of these children. And so the NGOs have been funded to do that. But it has done absolutely nothing in reducing the numbers. In fact, the worst part about it is that the ones that end up there are the ones that have survived the 2, 3, 4, 5 years that they were in the bush. Because a whole bunch of them never make it to the demobilization place. A whole bunch of them are simply left to die when they're injured or sick or abused. So how do we stop this? And the way we think and what we are working and what is proving to be effective. And that's why, as the Dean has indicated, so many significant bodies in the world of peace or structures and of fighting forces have seen, is that we're looking at the front end of this. So this old soldier who saw over 10,000 young people being transformed in a period of 6 months from a sort of happy-go-lucky youth movement with soccer games and rallies and songs and funny uniforms and so on, be transformed by that political party that was funding them all there, being transformed into a militia that conducted with machetes the slaughter of 800,000 human beings with the adults simply guiding them. The kids did it. Children slaughtered. Sierra Leone, same scenario on all sides. The children did it. And so, if the children are that instrument of conflict and are doing it, then why don't we look at it? How are they being used? Why are they using them? What's the use of them? And if it's a weapon system that's in the inventory and it's being used, how do we counter it? How do we stop it being used? Well, one of the very effective ways is to prevent it from being deployed into the battle. So prevention by in the school systems. And so we've created programs inside the school system, particularly from 8 to 12-year-olds, added to the curriculum after school and creating groups of peace groups and community groups with the parents involved, even the police are involved, in showing them through pedagogical tools that we've created for their country, from comic books to playing cards to different instruments, and using ex-child soldiers that we've been able to train to work with the teachers and work with the community. We're teaching them how not to get sucked in and be recruited. We are teaching them how to avoid it. And by the by, as an example, in our test case country, Sierra Leone, which had that 9-10-year war of child soldiers, the parents have come to us and said, now I can finally talk to my child about child soldiers, about what I was, because they've understood through the process that we've been able to create logically what had happened. And then from there, they can have an open debate. And so we've brought in the families to create an abhorrence of the idea of using children. So we said, let's cut off the flow as much as we can of these children. But the second part is that how do we stop the ones that are being used? What are the tools there? And that's where a significant amount of the research has been going in the field work in different countries, from the Congo and throughout a number of countries in Africa. We were even in Colombia. We're recently in Jordan. And how do we look at them being used? And how can we counter that use? And how can we actually affect these children being useful? If they're a tank, well, I find an anti-tank system. But if they're a child, and they are strategically effective because they're a great mobilization base, and they're tactically effective because they can create uncertainty in our forces. Imagine you're professional soldiers coming into a conflict zone and you're facing children, 9, 10, 12, 14, 16, who are manning the barricades and so on. The law of armed conflict, your law of self-defense, indicates that if they are belligerent and they are using weapons, you have complete right to use lethal kinetic force against them. And so there's been no doctrine until now. Doctrine is that sort of major thinking document from which we deduce what tactics we should use, what training we should give, what organizations we should use, and sometimes what equipment, non-lethal weapons. It's from the doctrine that all that is deduced. There was no doctrine, nowhere in the world. We searched it completely. And so we've been blowing away a lot of these children. But what about the effects of that? I'm in Quebec City, where I live. My family is still in Quebec City. But I've moved down here with my troops, and I go back as much as my troops will permit me financially to go back to see my family. This is my sales pitch to them to get more money. So the situation in regards to forgive me, I just lost my train of thought. And the tactical advantage of these children being used, but countering it. So this sergeant in this shopping center comes up to me, smart-looking guy, introduces himself, says, "Mon général, I'm so-and-so." I said, "How many missions have you had?" He said, 5. 5 missions in 12 years. Each mission is anywhere between 6 and 8 months. Plus all the preparation, it's about a year. We have now soldiers that have more complex combat time than World War II vets. And the World War II vets tell us that themselves. So this sergeant, I asked him what his job was, and he said, well, I'm in a recce platoon. You know, we oversee, we look far where people are going to be going. And I said, what job do you have? And within a nanosecond, he completely lost it. Water in his eyes, knees buckling, couldn't talk. He was having a hard time. And I brought him aside and we stabilized him and so on. And he said, you know, General, he said, I've been back 4 years and I have not yet been able to hug my children. Because he had to take out suicide bombers, which were probably 10 years old, to protect the convoys and protect their own troops. And kids planting IEDs, girls, boys. We're creating casualties of enormous significance by the fact that only solution is to take them out with kinetic force. So we have articulated that we can take away that tactical and strategic advantage by preparing our troops, preparing our police forces with a whole new set of tactics, new tools that we have been working on for these 7 years and that have now been published by the Canadian Army, that we continue to educate and train in so many countries, and it is now being adopted. These new tactics of how to react without necessarily having to use lethal force. And so, if we make the children less effective, then the guy who wants to recruit them will be less interested in using them. Because they're already fairly limited, but still usable. But if we have better troops, better trained with facing children beforehand and knowing how to react and how to diffuse it and not give in to this automatic reaction of facing children, but in fact using a de-escalation of tension and also an ability to use indirect systems, we can reduce the casualties on both sides. And so we want to stop the growing capability of child soldiers. Al-Shabaab in Somalia are involved in child piracy. We have part of the team here that wrote the first manual on how to handle child piracy. Children used as pirates. On the West Coast now more than on the East Coast. So we have created the tools in order to reduce the effectiveness of those children, and in so doing, reduce the possibility of conflicts escalating. They may be using them in more severe ways, like Boko Haram, who stole those 200 girls, if you remember, really recruiting them, and Al-Shabaab and what they're doing. We can reduce that effectiveness, and we can, in fact, make that a liability to them, not only through the International Criminal Court, but through processes and through tactical means that we can do it, because it is a crime against humanity to recruit children for war. Dr. Whitman and the team helped write the policy to assist the chief prosecutor of the International Criminal Court in how to prepare the lawyers and investigators in order to prosecute people who recruit children. They asked us to come and do that, and we did that in Den Haag. We launched it with the chief prosecutor last November with about 130-odd countries. We did that with them. And so early... And so the aim is to continue to reduce their effectiveness by us being more effective against them, And one of the reasons that is sort of farther behind from a strategic point of view of the children is the fact that research, again, led by Dr. Whitman and the team, have proven and are being reviewed by the international bodies that if an organization is willing to recruit children to fight, to kill, to rape, to maim, to destroy their own, then those people who are ready to do that are ready to go farther. They're ready to go to mass atrocities. And they could even go farther than that. They could even go to genocide. And I lived that. And so we have finally been able to introduce to the international community, to the UN and to the discussion on the prevention of mass atrocities and genocide, an early warning system. And the early warning system is if you see massive recruitment of children to fight in the conflict, you can bet this thing is going to get worse. And that should be a trigger for intervention. And to find means to reduce that and prevent that. And that is sort of a grander strategic objective that we've picked up and has, in fact, been recognized. Not only that battle that's going there, but the destruction of so many human beings because we're not able to stop it in due course. And so, ladies and gentlemen, our focus is the children. And our focus is realizing that the children are the mainstay of these conflicts and that their fundamental rights are being massively abused by throwing them into these conflicts, arming them and using them in a variety of factions, be they sex slaves and bushwives, to being simply carrying water, or being the kid who's walking in the minefield to blow up the mines as the elder ones come behind them, or being spies, or even shining the boots of peacekeepers inside the camps and being a spy in front. We are saying that all that is painting these children as child soldiers. And as a child soldier, they have lost all rights. And so we can have a moral high ground and a reference to intervene from the belief in human rights that we are, and putting the children's rights up front in the conflict, in the resolution of conflict, and the sustainment of peace. And so that is one of our grander references. And so, ladies and gentlemen, I'm coming close to the end. There's only 100 left. After what I have been living through and seen, not only in my duties as a peacekeeper, but subsequently as a senior commander, seeing the effects of these conflicts on so many veterans, seeing our inability to resolve it, seeing the effects of recruitment in our own communities as children are being moved to extreme violence and being recruited, and that our police forces are trying to figure out how to intervene, how to stop these youth gangs from creating such scenarios, how to assist the police in these diaspora arenas where they can help get ahead of the game and prevent these kids from being recruited. What we are seeing and seeking is that there is, to me, in my life, no higher objective than, in fact, eliminating the use of children as weapons of war. I was asked when I was in Rwanda, General, you've been abandoned by the UN. There is no reinforcements coming. They're not changing your mandate. In fact, they've pulled out most of your troops. You got no ammunition left. We ran out of food and water. And you're left there to rot. So a journalist who came in and was doing a story, sort of looked at the situation, and some of these journalists have a lot of time in conflict and so on. And he came to me and he said, General, he says, what the hell are you doing here? Why are you still here? You have no ability to fundamentally change the course of this genocide, let alone civil war. And my answer was spontaneous, not thought out. It comes from the spontaneity of who we are. It comes from our gut. It comes from our communities, our values. It comes from our schools. It comes from our churches. It comes from our way of life. That's what gives us these spontaneous, instinctive reactions and answers. Not sophisticated tactics. You as a human being. And what the answer was, if I save one Rwandan child, and that child becomes the witness of that genocide to the world, I will have achieved the minimum of my aim. For no one is allowed to abandon nor forget how 800,000 human beings innocently, in a period of 100 days, faster than the Holocaust, were slaughtered outright in their homes, in communities, in the streets. But worse is to slaughter them outright is one thing, but to mutilate, to rape, to make them suffer, to make them take days to die, that is not just a crime against humanity. Ladies and gentlemen, that is a sin. And so, using children to create such scenarios are, in fact, I guess, a capital sin. And so, the initiative is here to stay. Why? Because we got a job that's going to take a while to sort out. And it's here to stay because it's an action-focused research organization that is changing the face of conflict in far-off lands and influencing it even here at home, be it Halifax, Montreal, Toronto, Edmonton, with whom we're working right now. We want this place to realize that it is in the forefront of the only body in the world that has been able to bring a bridge between the military and police, the security forces, and the humanitarians and NGO, and actually find the innovative solutions, finally, to create the synergy of new ideas, to ultimately make us more effective, reduce casualties on our side, and very importantly, reduce casualties on the side of those poor children. Thank you very much.
Before we end tonight, if you don't mind, I'm just going to say a few words. And this is, I'm Seth Bloom. I'm speaking on behalf of the Shaar Shalom Synagogue. And I just want to say a few words of thanks. First, I want to say thank you to all of you who've turned up tonight. We're just delighted with the turnout. This is fantastic. I do need to say a few thanks of appreciation to some people who did make tonight happen. Dalhousie University, thank you for co-hosting this with us tonight, and the Faculty of Arts and Social Sciences. A particular thank you to Frank Harvey, who was instrumental in making tonight happen, as well as to Howard Ramos, Yuri Ganter, and a specific thank you to Genevieve McIntyre, whose meticulous attention to detail made tonight flow so smoothly. Genevieve, thank you. The purpose of this lecture series, the Shaar Shalom Lecture at Dalhousie University, is really to build bridges. To build bridges between Dalhousie University and the Jewish community, and outward as well. To bring awareness of important issues in society, around the world, and to bring this to the public at large, and hopefully raising our awareness, we can hopefully move forward. And it's really hard for me to think of a more appropriate speaker tonight than General Dallaire. General Dallaire's message is universal. And in our current political time, there's so much divisiveness, people finding excuses to see the difference in others, and it's remarkable. Your talk tonight has inspired me on what can be done at grassroots level to bring awareness to children and hopefully end conflict. And it's hard for me to imagine how the many conflicts around the world can end when children are not safe. So please join me for a final warm welcome and thank you to General Dallaire.
Wait. You put a microphone in front of a retired general who was an apprentice politician, you're in for a long haul. I would like to mention, because this is such a significant garrison town, that there is no more significant time to serve in uniform than now, or serve as a humanitarian or as a diplomat in these complex scenarios, these ambiguous scenarios that are out there that continue to grow and fester and move towards us. However, those who do serve ask two things of their fellow citizens. One, that when you send them in, you give them the tools to succeed. You have the same intestinal fortitude for them and their family as them and their families to sustain the conflict, particularly when we spilt blood. And we pull out when we've succeeded, even if it's going to take decades in certain cases. Not of fighting, but being there to assist. And the second thing they ask is that when they come back in body bags, when they come back injured, that they and their families be treated with dignity, with respect, and that they don't have to fight again as an injured veteran to live decently in this country.